بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. Imagine if someone came to you right now and they said that there is a group that has organized themselves right outside of your city, right outside of Dearborn. And this group, they have a very intense hatred for you. They have state-of-the-art weapons. They are getting ready to invade and to attack. And they are known to be without any mercy. Meaning that when they come inside of the city, they are going to destroy, they are going to kill every single individual that they can get their hands upon. It doesn't matter if it's a child, it doesn't matter if it's women, if it's the elderly, it doesn't matter who it is, they're going to slaughter every single person that lives within the city limits. If we heard news like this right now, how would we react? What would we do? Naturally, we would get together, we would say, look, there's an enemy at the gates. They're going to attack, they're going to kill everyone. We need to prepare ourselves. We need to see what are the weaknesses of this enemy. How do we defeat them? How do we prevent them from attacking us? One of the interesting things is that when it comes to us as human beings, we actually do have such an enemy. In the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us very clearly that you have an enemy that hates you, that is going to do everything possible to destroy every single one of you. When we look at the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us that there is an entity known as the Shaitan. He has an army of followers, and they're dedicated to one mission and one mission alone, which is to destroy every single one of us. When we open the pages of the Quran, Allah is very clear. He identifies the enemy for me and you. What does He say? He says, "Inna shaytana kana lil insani aduwan mubina." Allah is telling us very clearly, there is an enemy at the gates. He hates you like He hates nobody else. And Allah, He tells us that if you are not careful, He is going to destroy you, not just now, not just in this dunya. He is going to destroy you for all of eternity. You know, one of the things that Adam alayhi salam was told by Allah, it was in regards to the shaitan, where Allah, He says, فَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمُ إِنَّ هَذَا عَدُوٌ لَكَ وَلِزَوْجِكَ. Allah, He tells our forefather Adam, He says, Ya Adam, this is indeed an enemy of yours. Not just of you, but your wife as well. And then He warns Adam, He says, do not let him expel you from paradise, or else you're going to become miserable, you're going to suffer. Unfortunately, our grandfather, he made that mistake, and we are in the position that we are in. One of the things that I wanted to do on these nights of Muharram is that when we have such a clear enemy, so clearly identified with such clear hate, with an array of weapons that he uses against me and you, I wanted to use these nights, inshallah, to at least introduce the topic of who Shaitan is and some of the techniques, some of the traps that he uses to destroy us. Let's begin at the very start of the story. When we look all the way back, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is a God that loves to create. You know, many times we don't really consider the fact, and we think that we are the only beings that are here. But we have many narrations that explain this concept that Allah, He is Al-Khaliq. He is the creator. And to think that He has only created us and maybe one or two other beings, it doesn't fit with what we know from Allah. And so even before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created insan, He had created all of these other beings. One of them was the malaika, the angels. And the other that we know about was a race that was known as the jinn. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes in the Quran that these jinn are made from a flame of fire. He says, وَخَلَقَ الْجَانَ مِن مَارِجٍ مِن نَارٍ. We made these jinn from a smokeless fire, the flame of fire. Now, many times when we hear this, we imagine this race of jinn as these fire beings, but that's not really what it means. What it simply means is that just as Allah has created the human race from the substance of earth, meaning that we grow from taking from the earth, the foods that we eat, the lives that we lead, and then when we pass away, we go back into the earth. Our base substance is earth. The jinn were created in the same way. They have this base substance of fire. Now, what that means, we don't really know exactly, but Allah is trying to explain it to me and you. Amongst this race of jinn, there were different tribes, there were different groups. You know, many times when we think of the jinn, we just think of this evil group of entities that are hell-bent on destroying me and you. But within the jinn, just like within our own race, there are different tribes. There are different nationalities, different ethnicities. There are different shapes and sizes. And there are different religions. Meaning that amongst the jinn, some are going to be believers, and others amongst them are going to be disbelievers. One of these beings was a being by the name of Iblis. And Iblis, contrary to popular belief, he was from the group of the believers in Allah. In fact, he was so fervent in his ibadah, in his worship, that he begins to go to higher and higher levels before Allah, until he reaches this point that he is worshipping Allah alongside the malaika, alongside the angels. Just imagine how much ibadah, how much sacrifice it would take to reach that level. It is mentioned that for 6,000 years, Iblis is busy worshipping Allah. Now, in the meantime, something begins to happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He begins to create another race. And we have many Quranic verses about this, we have many ahadith about this. It's a whole discussion in and of itself. But what we know is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to create this being known as Adam out of mud. Now again, we don't know what that really means. Is it physical, that He actually created Adam out of the mud of the earth? Almost like you would make clay, pottery. Is it a metaphysical reference? Is it something else that we don't understand? Is it metaphorical, for example? There's a lot of discussion about this, but sufficient to say, Allah begins to create this being, and it is in a place that the malaika, among whom Iblis is worshipping alongside them, they can see the process taking place. They see this being formed, and it appears that it was a very long period of time, from the time that Allah initiates the creation until the time that the creation is ready. Now at one point Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He finishes the creation. He brings this being into life. And when He brings him into life, He says something to the angels. What does He say? He says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. He says, "Oh my angels, I am going to appoint this being that you see, this Adam, this insan, I am going to make him as my representative on earth." Now the angels, they ask a very strange question. And you know, angels, they are beings without desire. So they're just curious. They're not questioning Allah. They're simply curious. They ask Allah, they say, "Ya Allah, are you going to place on this earth a being that is going to cause corruption and shed blood?" Question: if the angels have just seen the creation of Adam, how in the world do they know that this is a being that is going to create corruption and shed blood on earth? How? The answer is very intricate. We have so many ahadith that delve into this idea of the creation of man. And one of the things that we know is that before Allah created insan, Bani Adam, He had created many other creations that resembled us. But they were different. They looked like us. They walked like us. They behaved like us. But they were a different creation. This is a wholly different discussion for another time, inshallah. I don't want to get sidetracked, but the ideas that we have within Islam of evolution, of what happened, it's so intricate. In any case, they ask this question. They say, "Ya Allah, why are you going to do this? We are here. We angels, we worship you. We praise you. This being, if you let him loose on the earth, he's going to cause mayhem." Allah, He tells them a very simple response. He says, "I know what you know not." Allah knows something. Now, what Allah does next, it should have been standard. All of these malaika, of course the malaika, they obey Allah. But Iblis, knowing the rank that he had as a believer, as a mu'min, he should have also obeyed, but he didn't. What happens? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. Allah, He commands, He says, "Oh malaika, I want you to do something. I want you to do sujood before this being." All of the malaika, they go into sujood, showing their humility, showing the superiority of this creation of Allah. But there was one being amongst them that says, "No, not gonna do it." It was none other than this being of Iblis. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He turns to Iblis. He says to him, and He asks him this question, قَالَ مَا مَنَعَكَ أَلَّا تَسْجُدَ إِذْ أَمَرْتُكَ. He says, "Ya Iblis, why is it, what prevented you from doing sujood when I commanded you?" You know what Iblis says? He says, قال أنا خير منه خلقتني من نار وخلقته min teen. He says, Ya Allah, I know that you are Allah. I know that you are God. He's speaking to Allah. He says that I am better than he. Why? Because you created me from fire. You created him from this stinky mud. Therefore, I am superior. I shouldn't be forced to do sujood before such a being. Ya Iblis, who told you even that fire is better than earth? Who even says earth is better than fire? Why did you make such a mistake? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells Shaitan to leave that position that he had amongst the malaika. He says, get down from here. You don't deserve this position anymore. You've disobeyed me. Then Shaitan, he says something very pivotal. He says, قَالَ أَنذِرْنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. He says, Ya Allah, will you do me a favor? Give me respite until the day of judgment. Now, Shaitan, he had an opportunity here. He could have said, Ya Allah, I made the biggest mistake of my life. He could have done tawbah. But Shaitan, what does he do here? And sometimes we see this within ourselves. He doubles down on the sin. He says, Ya Allah, I need time. Time for what? In the next verse it comes. He says that I want the time to show you that this human being that you asked me to do sujood is nothing. I'm going to prove to you that I am better than he. And the words that he uses is unbelievable. Shaitan, he says, قَالَ فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي. You know what Shaitan is saying? He says, because you have put me in this position, because you have deviated me. He says, therefore, I am going to wait in ambush for them. Where? On your straight path. He says, لَهُمْ صِرَاطَكَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. I'm not going to wait for them on the crooked path, the deviant path. Shaitan, he says, I'm going to go to that point that I see that human being. He's trying to get closer to you. He's attending the masjid now. He's doing his prayers now. He is doing tawbah. That is where I will try to mislead him. Sometimes we think that Shaitan is present in the bars, the clubs, places of haram, overt haram. But does Shaitan really need to be present there? Of course, Shaitan, he does everything in order to deviate us. But where he really puts his effort, he really gives his 110%. It is always on that siratak al-mustaqim, on the straight path of Allah. Now, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the mistakes that many times we make, and I know that it is the time of Muharram, it's very important that we understand this. We don't fall into this error. Many times when we look at these evil beings, we look at Shaitan, we look at Yazid, we look at Shimr, we look at Muawiyah, we look at Umar ibn Sa'ad, we look at these really bad people, and we begin to think to ourselves that these were just evil. They were born evil. There was never any good within them. This is a huge mistake, my brothers and sisters. When Allah, He tells us the story of Shaitan, why does He tell us? Because He knows that the seed of what made Shaitan fall into sin, it's within us as well. It's within us as well. When we look at the story of Karbala, we look at the story of Umar ibn Sa'ad, we look at the story of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. You know, the father of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he was a man by the name of Ziyad ibn Abi. He wasn't initially an evil man. He was actually a very intelligent, a very religious individual. And he was one of those that were from the supporters of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Many people don't know this. He was one of the very fervent supporters of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And he fought against Muawiyah in the Battle of Siffin. And what's amazing is that he had a weak point. If you see his name, Ziyad ibn Abi, he didn't have a father. Of course, everyone has a father. But at that time period, if you didn't have a known father, meaning you were born out of wedlock, then they would put that name, Ziyad, the son of his father. Ziyad ibn Abi, in the society of that time, as intelligent as he was, as clever as he was, as able to rise above the ranks as he was, he knew that the Arabs of that era would never accept someone that was born out of wedlock. You know, today, it's the opposite. In some countries, maybe 60, 70% of the people are born out of wedlock. It's not a big deal anymore. In fact, maybe for some, it's a point of pride. That my mother was, for example, very liberated. But during that time period, you didn't have a lineage. You didn't have anything really. After the peace treaty of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, Ziyad is still on the side of the Ahlul Bayt. Muawiyah, he figures out a trick. How do I get this guy to leave the side of the Ahlul Bayt and join me? He sees that the lineage issue is bothering Ziyad. He says to Ziyad, Ya Ziyad, I'm going to offer you something that no one else is able to offer you. Ziyad says, what is it? He says that I am going to say, and I'm going to bring witnesses, that I am actually your brother. Ziyad, he says, how? He says, Abu Sufyan, my father, and his father was known for visiting certain places. He says that I will say that my father, he visited your mother, and therefore you are actually my brother. My brothers and sisters, that was enough. After a lifetime of being on the side of the Ahlul Bayt, that was enough to pull Ziyad ibn Abi to the side of the Umayyads. And of course, his son Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, we know the story of what happens in Karbala. That root that we see in shaitan, that we see in these individuals, what is happening is that shaitan is working on us constantly. He knows us, maybe even better than we know ourselves sometimes. And he is consistently trying to work on those weaknesses that he knows that we have. Now here, when we look at the sin of shaitan, shaitan also does something that many times we do as well. What does the shaitan do? He has two errors, two sins really that he commits here. Number one, shaitan shows arrogance. Arrogance. Ask yourself this question. How many times have I felt arrogance within me? It's a potent lesson. Sometimes we look at another group, another ethnicity. We look down on them. We say that they are less than us. We are better than they are. Who told us this? Just as who told shaitan that fire was superior to earth? This is the first mistake of the shaitan. The second mistake, and again, we see this within ourselves. We shouldn't think that shaitan is this being that we could never become. He shows a lack of submission to Allah. How many times have we shown a lack of submission to Allah? Allah, He says, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Ya Allah, I'm willing to do the X, Y, but the Z, it's not for me. I'm not going to do it. We know it's wajib, we know it's a command, but we don't do it. It was really these 2 points, these 2 issues that causes shaitan to fall from that position, that we may worship Allah for a long time and never reach that position. We have to be very cautious, my brothers and sisters. Do not look at shaitan as a being that went to the dark side and we could never join him where he is. We have the same potential as he does. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now many people, they ask the most important question. They say, how is it that shaitan can trick us? What is the power that Allah has given to shaitan, or at least that shaitan possesses? Alhamdulillah, shaitan has just one superpower. And that superpower is such a weak power. It's not really a superpower. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, الَّذِي يُوَسْوِسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ. He says that the power that shaitan has, all that he can do to me and you, is he can come to us and he can whisper. That's all. That's all that he can do. And when you really think about it, it's such a weak power. This is why Allah in the Quran, He says, إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا. He says, indeed, the strategy, the plot of shaitan, it's very weak. Because imagine if I told you that army that was outside of your city, that was about to attack and invade, if I told you that that army, it just had one ability. They didn't have any weapons, no tanks, no planes. They could just come and they could stand next to you and whisper. That's it. You would laugh. You would say, how is it that anyone could be deceived by such an army, such an entity? But shaitan, he is very clever. And the Quran, it actually tells us exactly how shaitan uses that waswasa in order to deceive us. What does the Quran say? The Quran, it says, it's such a potent verse. Really, if we take the tactics of shaitan, we can shrink it down into just this verse. He says, يَئِدُهُمْ وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ وَمَا يَئِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. Allah essentially, if we want to translate this verse, He says that what shaitan does is that shaitan is a marketer. Marketing. Many of you here may be in the field of marketing. What is the job of a marketer? Of course, let's assume that the marketer is not moral. He's an immoral marketer. What is the job of that immoral marketer? The job is very simple. I'm going to take a faulty product, a rotten product, and I'm going to make it appear as if it is the most beautiful, the most magnificent thing that you have ever laid your eyes upon. Imagine that someone, he has a grocery store, and unfortunately in the Middle East sometimes we would see this. And what they do is they take the rotten fruit and they put it on the bottom of the basket, and then they put the really good fruits on the top. This has happened to me more than once, unfortunately. But the goal of that individual is what? To show you something which is not there. It's to deceive you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse, what does He say? He says that shaitan gives them promises and he excites false hopes within them. Two things. And then he tells us something very clear. He says, shaitan does not promise anything except for delusion. It's amazing, this ability of the shaitan to convince us that the vilest of things, the most disgusting of things, it is the most beautiful that we have ever seen. I'll give you a few examples here. Right now, if I ask you, what is this substance that we know as alcohol? If you really look at what alcohol is, what is it? It is rotten juice. If I put rotting juice in front of you, would you drink it? You'd probably get upset. Why are you offering me this? Imagine you go to someone's home and they put rotten juice in front of you. Bismillah. Have some. What does shaitan do? He takes that disgusting substance, which has all of these negative consequences. The next morning when you wake up, you feel as if a sledgehammer hits you on the head. While you're under the influence, you're committing all sorts of things that the next day you are ashamed of, that you might have to go to prison for. And he takes that disgusting habit and he makes it appear as if it is the most amazing thing ever. If you look at movies, you look at music videos, you look at TV shows, whenever they show alcohol, how do they show it? It's so attractive. They show these very wealthy people, they're sitting around a table, everyone is very happy, everything is going well for them, they have everything that they want, and they are dropping these alcoholic beverages back into their mouth. How do you convince human beings that the worst thing for them is one of the most beautiful things? Allah, He says it very clearly that يَعِدُهُمْ وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا, that He promises them these false things, He puts these false hopes within them. But in the end, when that individual wakes up, he realizes that the shaitan had given him nothing but delusion. A second example that sometimes we see, the hijab is something which is very difficult in this society. It's very difficult. And sometimes I see people, they approach me, women, they say that I feel like I'm being held back by wearing the hijab. Because when we look at the people around us, no one really pays us any attention. We're hidden, we're covered, we're not able to show our beauty. But everyone else, they are able to wear designer clothing, they are able to put on the latest makeup trends, the latest fashion trends. They say we feel as if we're being held back. If only I could take off the hijab, then people would pay attention. I would be so much happier. What we find is that this is also one of the traps of the shaitan. Because we know that when you attach your well-being, your sense of happiness to your physical beauty, then for the rest of your life, what are you chasing? You're chasing something that, as much as we don't want it to leave us, it is going to diminish year by year by year. Imagine that you have pinned all of your hopes, your dreams, that people will see me as something valuable, to something that every year it is fading, no matter how much we try. Allah, He says it so beautifully that يَعِدُهُمْ وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. Now, here I wanted to open up just a few more minutes the question of how shaitan tricks us in other ways. Because this was the basics of it. And there's many little tricks that shaitan uses, which the Ahlul Bayt, they tell us in a hadith. And they warn us about this issue. Number one of the things that the shaitan does, and this is important more for the believers, is that whenever he sees that you have committed a sin, a small sin, not a big sin, he comes to you and he says, you know that the door of Tawbah is open to you. One of the things that Allah has promised me and you, He says that whenever you commit a sin, the door of Tawbah is always open. All you have to do is say astaghfirullah. You have to be repentant. You have to feel sorry. And I will wipe away all of the effects of that sin. In fact, we have some traditions that Allah even hides the sin from the angels that are entrusted with writing down the sin. He loves us so much that He doesn't even want us to be embarrassed in the akhirah, that you committed that sin. The angel is going to mention it in the akhirah. He tells the angel, or he makes the angel forget about that sin that you committed. Now, Shaitan, he knows this. He says, look, that sin that you committed, it was pretty exciting, wasn't it? It was really exciting. It felt good. Why don't you do another sin? The door is open, right? You can always do tawbah. You're young. You're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, you're in your 40s, you're in your 50s. Do something else. And then do tawbah. If he gets you, he causes you to pollute your soul. There's that now greater distance between you and Allah. He then says, look, you did two. Do another one. What's going to happen? The door of tawbah is always open. This is one of the ways that the shaitan, he takes the greatest of believers, and sin by little sin by little sin, he drags you from one point to another point, and eventually shaitan knows exactly where that path goes, because eventually you reach a point that maybe we pass away from this world. Who has said that I am going to live for 70, 80 years? Many people, they don't even reach their 20s, their 30s. But also, there is the possibility that as I pollute my soul, as I commit more and more sins, and that separation is created between me and Allah, what happens? I begin to question God. Does Allah even exist? Do I even need to worship Allah? Do I even want to worship Allah? Because I'm having so much fun with these sins. In fact, it's become a way of life for me that I can't even imagine living as a religious person anymore. A person who can never drink, who can never gamble, who can never commit these sins. I can't even fathom it anymore because I've been living in sin for so long. Shaitan, he pulls us bit by bit by bit. And eventually he takes us so far off the path that we are willing to commit the most heinous of sins. My brothers and sisters, one of the examples of an individual who began as a normal human being, he began as one of us perhaps, maybe better than us. It is the story of none other than Umar ibn Sa'd. You know, Umar ibn Sa'd, when he began, he wasn't a bad person, he wasn't a bad human being. But the love that he had for dunya, for money, for power, it gradually pulled him. And he began to commit one sin after another sin, after another sin, until eventually a choice was given to him. What was the choice? Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he called Umar ibn Sa'd, who at this point he had been serving the Umayyad dynasty for many years. He says, Ya Umar, I know that there is one thing that you love the most in this world. It is to be the governor of that land in South Tehran known as Ray. At that time, Ray, it was a very fertile region. And to be a governor during that time period, it wasn't to be a governor today. What it meant was that you had the power of life and death over your constituents. You could literally execute who you wanted. You could jail who you wanted. You could tax however much you wanted. You were essentially a mini god over that area that you were given power. Ubaydullah, he says, Ya Umar, I'm going to give you this paper. You have been granted the governorship of Ray. It's yours. Take it and go. Ubaydullah, he gives him 4,000 men. He says, go, Ray is yours. As Umar ibn Sa'd, he is leaving, he encamps on the outskirts of the city. Suddenly he's looking. He sees a messenger coming towards him from the side of the city. The messenger arrives. They give him a piece of paper. What is this paper you have been commanded to see? Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. He goes. He says, what is it? Ubaydullah, he says that Hussein ibn Ali has risen up. You have to go and you have to fight against him. You have to battle against him. Umar, he says, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. He knew. Ubaydullah, he says, then give me back the governorship of Ray. Give it back. Not a big deal. I'm not going to force you to do it. Umar, at that point, he says, and he verbally says these words. He says that I see between me this choice between paradise and the hellfire. And he says, but I can't do anything except go after that governorship of Ray, for it is the apple of my eye. He takes the paper. He goes to war against Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He slaughters the most beautiful being of his time period. My brothers and sisters, on these days of Muharram, these nights of Muharram, we have to be very cautious. That just like people in the past, they were dragged from good people, from decent people, into the worst of people. We have to know that that potential exists within us. Just as the potential exists within you to rise to the highest of the levels, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He was creating Adam, and He tells the angels that I know what you know not. Inshallah, we ask that Allah gives us the tawfiq of being from the most elite of the elite amongst His servants. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلى على محمد وآل محمد. ثانية على حب الزهراء صلى على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على. ثالثة لتعجيل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان صلى على محمد وآل محمد. If we can give another salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad for the love of Abu Abdullah al-Husayn alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala. Inshallah, just like our nightly reminders, before we enter into the majalis of Abu Abdullah al-Husayn alayhi salam, it's advised that we show any type of way of showing grief or trying to shed tears for Abu Abdullah alayhi salam. In these nights of mourning and in Muharram, these tears are an opportunity for all of us to change ourselves. Not just to shed tears again. It's going to be the same reminder every night, inshallah, because of how important it is. Not just to shed tears for the sake of shedding tears. There's a lot of benefit in shedding those tears, but something that gives more weight to those tears is when we shed them, it changes our insides. It changes our hearts. It turns into action, inshallah. This is the most important thing. We want these tears to translate into change of action, inshallah. Through Abu Abdullah. We have a very, very divine opportunity in these nights of Muharram. There's only 5-6 nights left. It's going by very quickly. This is an opportunity. It's like a divine breeze that comes and it goes very quickly. So inshallah, we're able to benefit through those tears. And they say if you can't shed any tears, at the very least, put your head down in mourning. Inshallah, you get the reward as if you were shedding tears. And another advice we have from our ulama is that if you can, before the majalis start, to soften your heart a little bit. Maybe sometimes having shortcomings with God or committing certain sins makes our hearts a little bit harder and makes it harder for them to shed, makes it harder for our eyes to shed tears. So maybe even doing istighfar before we begin into the majalis as well. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli. I apologize, brothers and sisters. We're just going to wait really quickly just to get the lights off. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. ثانية على حب الزهراء صلى على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على. There's one more light, I believe the middle chandelier, it's in the back. If one of the sisters, please, I apologize. If somebody can just turn it off from the back wall, it's probably a switch to turn off. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ahsantum, thank you. If you can give me one more salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة وموضع الرسالة ومختلف الملائكة. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, our beloved holy Prophet. And the Ahlul Bayt, it was in your homes that Allah blessed us with guidance and revelation. And upon you descend the angels day in and day out. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليك يا مظلوم صلى الله عليك يا أيها الشهيد في كربلاء. May Allah's peace and blessings be upon you, our beloved Imam al-Hussein, our beloved oppressed Imam, the Imam who was slaughtered by the shores of the Euphrates, while his mouth was dry of thirst. Everybody together, jami'an, jami'an. Ya Habibi, Ya Hussein, Nur Aini, Ya Hussein. Everyone was Sahib al-Zaman. Ya Habibi, Ya Hussein, Nur Aini, Ya Hussein. Ya Rahmatullah al-Wasi'a, Hussein. Light of our eyes, Hussein, our beloved Hussein. O vast mercy of Allah, Hussein. On this night we remember the first of the Shuhada, the one who left this world before the Imam even arrived in Karbala, the cousin of Abu Abdullah, his ambassador who went to Kufa to gather his supporters, Muslim ibn Aqil alayhi salam. Sallallahu alayka ya Muslim. We testify, ya Muslim, that you did what you could and what was in your capacity to help the Imam of your time. May Allah reward this blessed poet who wrote the following words. I am Muslim and I have a pledge with Hussein to gather support and topple a tyrant's reign.
They wrote to us of this tyranny they'd complain, forbidden on us to from request to abstain. O angel of death, when for any soul you'd call, they answer you, at your feet even tyrants fall. Whereas I am left no assistance, left me them all. And as upon my head calamities fall, I walk alone, no supporters from street to street. The angel of death calls out, Muslim, your death grief. I feel the clutch of failure upon my heartbeat. Because of thee will Hussein face a harsh defeat. It may be so that with martyrdom I'm fated, but my reply, my master, Hussein's awaited. By the picture of Hussein killed, I am haunted. And so by your coming, O death, I am taunted. Brothers and sisters, imagine you are in the position of Muslim. Muslim was sent by Abu Abdullah to the Kufans who had sent letters committing to follow the rightful leadership of Hussein. Muslim wanted to see if they were truthful and loyal. He spoke to the people in Kufa. Group after group, they joined Muslim. Some narrations say that 30,000 people gathered and pledged allegiance to him. Muslim, being confident in the support of the Kufans, sent a letter to Imam al-Hussein saying, Ya Abu Abdullah, I testify these people are loyal. 30,000 people have pledged allegiance. They are waiting for your lead. Time goes by after the letter is sent, and the Imam gradually makes his move from Mecca towards Kufa. It is said that tens of thousands prayed behind Muslim in the mosque of Kufa. Then a man suddenly dressed like Abu Abdullah walked in with a group of followers. People thought the Imam had arrived. They rushed towards him to meet him, to kiss his hands and swear allegiance. Just when the people were gathered, the man removed the veil, and it was none other than Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, the cruel governor of Basra, who had impersonated and deceived them. Ibn Ziyad issued an order proclaiming that anyone assisting or even found associating or speaking with Muslim would be beheaded. These people were frightened, so they slowly began to disappear away from Muslim. When Muslim had finished the Isha prayer, it is said that only a few of the 30,000 people remained behind him. Imagine being with Muslim on the last night before he was apprehended by the enemies. He had a strong following in the Masjid of Kufa, and now he was all alone, a stranger in Kufa. He was a complete stranger with no place to go. No one even dared to invite him to stay because they feared being seen or exposed to Ibn Ziyad. Imagine yourself being in the same shoes as Muslim. He stopped at an old lady's house and sent his salams. Her name was Taw'a. She exchanged her salams. He said, O woman of God, when you give me a drink of water. She gave him the water and went back into her home. Taw'a realized he remained at her doorstep. She asked him, saying, go to your family. It is not appropriate for you to sit at my door. Muslim thought to himself in his heart filled with grief, replying, saying, O woman of Allah, I have no family. I have no supporters. The old woman questioned Muslim, found out who he was, and gave him asylum as she loved Amir al-Mu'mineen and his family. When she learned who he was, she invited him in and offered him shelter for the night. She gave Muslim food and water and took him to a room where he spent the night. But then Taw'a's wretched son was a soldier in Ibn Ziyad's army. He eventually finds out that it's Muslim ibn Aqil and calls the authorities to receive his awarded money. Allahu Akbar, 300 of Ibn Ziyad's men quickly come and ambush Muslim. The brave warrior of Bani Hashim fights from all directions and even across the rooftops in Kufa. Some narrations say that Muslim killed over 100 men single-handedly. They dug a trench to contain him, and when Muslim was so wounded from fighting the men off and he could no longer go on, it is said they pounced on Muslim, they chained him, they dragged him to the court of Ibn Ziyad. The enemies apprehended him and took him to the governor's castle. Muslim was taken to the top of the castle building. In his final moments, Muslim asked for a bit of water. The narrations say that Muslim tries to take a sip of water, but with his lips bleeding, the water becomes najas and he is unable to drink it. Listen to these words, they tell me, drink before we throw you to the ground. Each time I sipped in this cup, my own blood I found. I gazed to the land of death to which Hussein's bound. Ya Hussein, the world has your cousin abandoned. It is said they poured him another cup of water, but the same thing happens with the blood. He realizes this is how he is going to meet his Lord. Thirsty like all of the other shuhada of Karbala. Before they beheaded Muslim, he turns towards Mecca. Imagine for a moment what sorrow Muslim feels in his last moments, knowing that his Imam is coming to Kufa to all this betrayal. He begins to cry and say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. One of Ibn Ziyad's men then tells him, those who demand what you're demanding do not cry at this moment. Muslim replied, by Allah, I don't cry upon myself. I'm crying for those of my family who are coming to you. I'm crying for Hussein and the family of Hussein. Ajarakum Allah, the cursed enemies, the beheaded Muslim ibn Aqil. It is said they then pushed his blessed body off the top of the castle. It is then said they tied the body of Muslim on the back of a horse, and the horse rode around the city with Muslim's body dragging behind. Everybody together, wa Muslimah. ومسلما ومسلما وشهيدا وغريبا ومسلما ومسلما. Not long after, news arrives to the camp of Abu Abdullah. When Imam al-Hussein heard the news of Muslim being martyred, he called for his daughter Hamida. He brings her over, he sits her on his lap, he caresses her head with his hand as they do to the orphans. She asks him, why Abu Abdullah do you do that with your hand over my head? And he responds to her in the narration saying, Hamida, I am now your father. Ya Abu Abdullah, you caress Hamida's head in this moment, but Hussein, after your shahada, who will caress the head of Sukaina? Who will care for the girls and the women of Hussein? What kind of treatment will the daughters of Hussein be given after their father is killed and laying on the grounds of Karbala? Wa Husseina, wa Husseina, wa Ghariba, wa وشهيدا ومظلوما. Everybody, let us send our salams to Abu Abdullah as we do every single night from our hearts. Everybody with the loudest of your voices. Ya Husayna, Ya Husayna, salamun min qulubin anta fiha. Ya Husayna, سلام من قلوب أنت فيها. يا حسينا لك الأرواح طرا نفتديها. May we be sacrificed for you, Ya Abu Abdullah. Ya Husayna, peace be upon you from all the hearts you are in. Ya Husayna, peace be upon you from all the hearts you are in. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا على بيت محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. To Allah we belong and to Him is our return. And soon the aggressors will know what change their affairs will take. And the end times will be for the righteous, Ya Allah, in the name of Hussein, by the right of Hussein, by the thirst of Hussein, Ya Allah. We ask you to forgive our sins. We ask you to allow us to shed tears and make a change through these majalis. We ask you to give us a good end on the path of truth. We ask you to fill our hearts with the love of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. We ask you to cure our sick ones and forgive our deceased, Ya Allah. We ask you to bring victory and relief to the oppressed all around the world, specifically those in Palestine, Ya Allah. We ask you to hasten the return of our Imam Sahib al-Asri wal-Zaman and to make us amongst his loyal companions, Ya Allah. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Inshallah, if we can recite a quick verse of Quran and pray for our sister and give this majlis on her behalf and pray for her. We have a sister in the community that is dealing with cancer, inshallah. So inshallah, if we can recite this verse together. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعا ويكشف السوء. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. Ya Allah, cure the sister and cure all of our sick and forgive all of our deceased. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. ثانية على حب الزهراء صلى الله على محمد وآل محمد. ثالثة لتعجيل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان صلى الله على محمد وآل محمد. We're going to talk a little bit, inshallah, about the Quran. This is when we wanted everybody, inshallah, to bring your own personal Qurans. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We'll talk very quickly to understand what's happening in the world right now with this Quran burning in Sweden. Recently, there are certain events that have taken place where a man has burned and desecrated the Holy Quran in Sweden. And this has caused an uproar with the Muslims all around the world. And this is not something that we should be taking lightly to any extent. We should not be passive about events like this that happen in the world. When somebody desecrates the holy book, especially the Quran and the faith and the conviction that it holds and we have within the Quran, this is a direct attack on the religion of Islam.
So we're going to mention a couple of points and even some of the words that our grand ulama and our maraja have even talked about to show how serious this matter is. So as you know, again, the burning of the Quran is a direct attack on the religion of Islam. This is a direct attack, burning the holy book, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is also an indirect attack to all the other holy books and all the other religions as well. This is something that we should not take lightly at all, and we should stand and tell other people about this and spread this on social media to show that Muslims are not going to be passive when you try to attack our religion in these types of ways or any type of way. So inshallah, we wanted to bring the Quran, and soon we'll be holding the Quran and reciting some of the chapters a few times with each other. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Surah As-Saf, verse 8, it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. يريدون ليطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم والله متم نوره ولو كره الكافرون. They desire to put the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out with their mouths, but Allah will perfect His light, though the unbelievers may be averse or hate such a thing. The religion of Islam is the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This religion is never going to be put out by any of the enemies. No matter what the enemies try to do to ruin the religion, to ruin the image of Islam, to try to destroy the Quran, to try to cause havoc and uproar around the world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it Himself, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to perfect His light and perfect this religion, no matter what the unbelievers think, even if they're adverse to it. So the religion of Islam itself is a light, and the Quran itself is a branch from this religion of light. If you want to look at the Quran, it's as if this Quran is the sun. Can someone put out the sun with their mouth? Can people try to put out the sun with their mouth? Can people even try to put out a fire, a burning fire with their mouth? Absolutely not. So we want to congregate, inshallah, and have our Qur'ans at these times, and to show that we stand against these types of actions that are being done, trying to cause havoc and harm within our own people and around the world, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. It goes to the extent to show how serious these acts of defiance of religion and attacking holy books are, especially the Quran. We have words from one of our Grand Maraja, Sayyid Sistani. I will read it very quickly. Inshallah, we'll start reciting the verses of Quran. He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It says, Excellency, Mr. Antonio, and I don't know the last name, I'm sorry, it's a little off. Secretary General of the United Nations. Greetings with respect and appreciation. It has been reported in the media that someone in the Kingdom of Sweden desecrated a copy of the Holy Quran, intending to insult the religion of Islam. This disgraceful behavior has occurred more than once in different countries in recent years. But it is noticeable that this time it took place with an official permit from the Swedish police, claiming that it is a requirement of respect for freedom of expression. However, it is certain that respect for freedom of expression does not justify permitting such a shameful act, which represents a flagrant attack on the sanctity of the beliefs of more than 2 billion Muslims in the world and creates an environment conducive to the spread of extremist ideas and wrong practices. The Supreme Religious Authority condemns what happened and calls on the United Nations to take effective steps to prevent the recurrence of similar incidences, compel countries to reconsider legislation that allows such occurrences, and call for establishing the values of peaceful coexistence between followers of different religions and intellectual backgrounds based on caring for rights and mutual respect for all. This is the office of Sayyid Sistani. This is a direct letter from Sayyid Sistani to the United Nations. How serious is it? He's one of the leading Maraja in the world, writing a letter to show how serious this is. And then we also have part of some of the sayings from Sayyid Ali Khamenei, another one of the leading Maraja in the world, saying the insult to the Holy Quran in Sweden is a bitter, conspiratorial, dangerous event. It is the opinion of all Islamic scholars that the agent who has insulted the Holy Quran deserved the severest punishment. To this extent. It's no joke, brothers and sisters. In addition, the Swedish government should know that supporting criminals against the world of Islam is equivalent to going into battle array for war. Look how serious to the extent of what one of our Maraja says about this. And this action has created feelings of hatred and enmity toward them and all the Muslim nations and many of their governments. So again, we will stand together and we will stand up for the Holy Quran against this act of defiance. And what better time, inshallah, through Muharram where everybody comes together. This is also a sign for us to build a relationship with the Holy Quran, to build a connection with the Holy Quran, to stay close to it and learn how to defend it, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Inshallah, if you have your own personal Quran, if you can lift your Quran with me. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If we can recite a few verses, inshallah, for the protection of our brothers and sisters around the world and against these acts of defiance. Let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha collectively. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
مع القرآن 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 Everyone together. مع القرآن 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 مع القرآن
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Inshallah we'll be having a Latmiya portion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If the brothers can please just pick up the chairs and move them to the side and get the rows as we usually do every single night. And I'm just respectfully asking the sisters if they can just take a step to the back, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أفلح من أعاد ذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. بدل انتظار